Welcome to Social Aloe Ministries, where we are committed to glorifying God while exposing the devil. I'm going to spend a few minutes looking at relationships and examining the question, who's your daddy? And yes, it's a slang, who's your daddy? But it is very important that when someone comes into your life, that you know where they're coming from and who sent them. And this is not about a person's natural father, even though this figures into the equation. It's about who the person's spiritual father is. And no, I'm not referring to a person's pastor. Is a person a child of God or a child of the devil? The Lord created everyone, but not everyone is a child of God. And we're going to look at examples with Ruth and Jezebel. Both women at one point in time dressed themselves up, and you could say tried to seduce a man. One was successful, the other failed. And putting on makeup. From what I understand, women put on what is called foundation. Nothing can stand on a weak foundation. A foundation will crack and true colors will shine through. And that's one of the things I'll point out regarding why Ruth was successful and Jezebel was not. Now I mentioned about who's your daddy. Men, it is very important that if you're courting someone and you're going to take a step to marriage, that you ask that person's father for permission. Yes, the person's natural father if available. But first and foremost, ask the Lord. And that is, of course, once you've ascertained that the person is of and from the Lord. Ask the Lord, because it's also an opportunity for Him to let you know if that is truly the person He wants you to marry. Because in some cases, it may not be His will. And also an examination of this is how the Lord will stop certain things from happening. I mentioned about Ruth and why she was successful. You may know that Naomi sent Ruth to the threshing floor and she dressed up, and she probably looked the best that Boaz had ever seen her. But that wasn't why she was successful. Boaz had seen her natural beauty beforehand. He'd seen her true colors. And that's one of those things. When people come into your life and they're from the devil, they will come trying to make themselves look better than they are. But true colors have a way of shining through. It doesn't matter how long it takes, it's going to shine through. Let's take a look at the story of Ruth and Boaz. Let's start in Ruth chapter 3, from verses 1 through 8. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said unto her, My daughter, shall I not seek rest for thee, that it may be well with thee? It's also important to have a third party who can possibly see things that you don't in the other person. A trusted person. Someone who's truly looking out for your best interest. And not someone who's trying to pawn a Jezebel off to you as being a Ruth. And now, is not Boaz of our kindred, with whose maiden thou wast? Behold, he winnoweth barley tonight in the threshing floor. Wash thyself therefore, and anoint thee, and put thy raiment upon thee, and get thee down to the floor, but make not thyself known unto the man, until he shall have done eating and drinking. Now, this may sound kind of sinister about eating and drinking, and may make it seem as if she wants Boaz to be drunk, possibly like how Jacob was probably drunk in Genesis 29, why he ended up marrying Leah. But no. And it shall be, when he lieth down, that thou shalt mark the place where he shall lie, and thou shalt go in and uncover his feet, and lay there down, and he will tell thee what thou shalt do. And I pause. A lot of Christian women are told not to show an interest in a man and let the man pursue her. Yes, but in the very first example of a God-ordained union, the Lord brought the woman to the man. And when Adam saw Eve, He said, "This is the bone of my bone and the flesh of my flesh." So he recognized his gift from God. And I say that because there are times when a woman may not approach a man like a Ruth will not approach a Boaz, but a Jezebel will. And that can cause problems. But there's also this. There are times when a woman will express an interest in a man, and the man will not be interested, but she keeps on pursuing him. That is not good. That is not good. If you show your interest towards a man, a Boaz, and he does not reciprocate that interest, it is time to move on. Because even if you're a Ruth, you're going to come across to him as being a Jezebel. I'm going to talk about Jezebel here a bit later. And she said unto her, "All that thou sayest unto me, I will do." Another thing, Naomi was looking out for Ruth's best interest. There were things that went on between Boaz and Ruth that should have made it clear to them that they could have a relationship. But in a sense, they needed an external nudge in order to make that happen. But there are times in life where a person will try to put two people together for whatever reason, and it is not a good match at all. Please be careful of that. And she went down down to the floor and did according to all that her mother-in-law bade her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of corn. And she came softly and uncovered his feet and laid her down. And it came to pass at midnight that the man was afraid and turned himself, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. His gift from God was at his feet. Now, initially he was afraid, but then he saw his gift from God, and he wasn't afraid. There were some things that had to work out in order for them to be together, and I won't go into that part in this expose. But he was afraid, and then he recognized his gift from God, and he wasn't afraid anymore. If you present yourself to a man, and he's initially afraid, but he doesn't have a sense of peace about it, and he's still afraid, it is time to move on. It is time to move on. Again, at that point in time, even if you're Ruth, you're going to start looking like a Jezebel to him if he's still afraid. And if there's any uneasiness when two people are together, that is not of God. So Naomi, she took the initiative, Ruth took the initiative. That's the second time I've mentioned Naomi's name, and it just occurred to me. When you read the entire book of Ruth, you may realize that it is quite possible that Naomi may have been closer in age to Boaz than Ruth was. However, she realized that her time had come and gone, and it was time to put Ruth and Boaz together. There are times when people step outside their roles, where a person who's called to be a Naomi decides to try to take Ruth's place, similarly to how Leah took Rachel's place, and that caused problems. If the Lord has called you to be a Naomi, be a Naomi. And when I say a Naomi, you could be a man or a woman, and the Lord may have called you to bring two people together. Stay in your lane. Stay in your lane. So, a part of why Ruth could confidently, maybe she was nervous, but still confidently approach Boaz was based on their previous interactions. I have seen it in real life where two people are interacting and one person's view of the interaction is totally different from the other. One person seeing potential and the other person seeing nothing at all. Do not misinterpret things. In the story of Ruth and Boaz, it was very clear that they had a mutual respect. And you can even say adoration towards each other. It was just that Naomi was a catalyst for that relationship. And now going back in the story to Ruth 2, that gives you a reason why you could see why Naomi could actually approach Boaz. There were clear signs. Please do not misinterpret the signs. In Ruth 2, Ruth had gone into Boaz's field to work. When Boaz showed up, he saw Ruth and asked the men who it was. And they told her that, or told him that it was Ruth, the Moabitess, who had come back from Moab with Naomi. Her reputation had preceded her. Your reputation will precede you. If you have a bad reputation, it may be known to the person you're trying to approach. But Ruth, she was different. So starting on verse 8. Then said Boaz unto Ruth, Hear it thou not, my daughter. Go not to glean in another field, neither go from hence, but abide here fast by my maidens. Let thine eyes be on the field that they do reap, and go there after them. Have I not charged the young men that they shall not touch thee? That's one of those things. He's taking care of her. Even though he was making advances towards her, he was taking care of her. Ladies, some of you have been through some stuff. You've met some men who have done some bad things to you. Avoid an unhealthy attraction to a man just because that man is kind to you. It may be just his nature. It doesn't necessarily mean that he has an interest in you. Please be very careful. And when thou art athirst, go unto the vessels and drink of that which the young men have drawn. Then she fell on her face and bowed herself to him to the ground. Ruth was showing humility. Ruth was showing humility. And said unto him, Why have I found grace in thine eyes, that thou shouldest take knowledge of me, seeing I am a stranger? By the way, there were other women in the field. Ruth was probably filthy at this point in time. She probably had husk from wheat all over her face. She was probably dirty, sweaty. She wasn't looking her best. But Boaz saw things in her. So I mentioned about makeup and foundation earlier. When Ruth had gotten dressed up, it truly didn't matter, because Boaz knew she was a beautiful woman already. He had seen what was inside. He had seen what was inside. And Boaz answered and said unto her, It had fully been shown to me all that thou hast done unto thy mother-in-law since the death of thine husband. It's nothing. When the Lord brings two people together, he will reveal those individuals towards each other. Again, Ruth was not the only woman out in the field, but she stood out to Boaz. When the Lord brings you together with your Ruth or your Boaz, depending on your gender, he will point you out to each other. If one person is saying, that's my Ruth or that's my Boaz, and the other person isn't reciprocating, basically one of two things. Either it's not time, or that is not your Ruth, or that is not your Boaz. Either way, back off. Proverbs tells us that an inheritance claimed too soon will not be blessed in the end. So it can be just as disastrous approaching someone that you think is your Ruth or Boaz if it is too early, or if that person actually is not your Ruth or your Boaz. So, all that thou hast done unto thy mother-in-law since the death of thine husband, and how thou hast left thy father and thy mother, and the land of thy nativity, and art come unto a people which thou knowest not therefore. There are times when the Lord is going to bring two people together. One or both of them have to be willing to leave where they are to where the Lord is trying to get them to. I'll give you an example. Some of you may be convinced that you're going to a church and that is where you're going to meet your Ruth or your Boaz. And it may not be where the Lord is going to put the two of you together. But if you refuse to leave your church, then the two of you won't meet. But the Lord, He has ways of working things out. So be receptive to what the Holy Spirit of the Lord is telling you. The Lord recompense thy work, and a full reward be given thee of the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings thou art come to trust. He also recognized that she was a woman of God, someone who had put her trust in the Lord. Then she said, Let me find favor in thine sight, my Lord, for that thou hast comforted me. Boaz comforted her. And for that thou hast spoken friendly unto thine handmaid, though I be not like unto one of thine handmaids. See, there are other women, but Ruth stood out. And Boaz said unto her, At mealtime, come thou hither, and eat of the bread, and dip thy morsel in the vinegar. And she sat beside the reapers, and she reached her parched corn. And she did eat, and was sufficed, and left. And when she was risen up to glean, Boaz commanded his young men, saying, Let her glean even among the sheaves, and reproach her not. And let fall also some of the handfuls of purpose for her, and give them that she may glean them, and rebuke her not. You can say that the spark that was necessary for a relationship, it was there from the very beginning. They may not have been thinking about relationship, but you can see the interaction that they had. A mutually respectful relationship. It provided a foundation for them to build a romantic relationship on. Please be careful. If you are a Ruth, you have to be a Ruth. And if you're a Boaz, you have to be a Boaz. If you're a pretender, the Lord is going to reveal your true colors. And regardless of how far the quote-unquote relationship goes, it may not go well for you if you're pretending. Be yourself. The person the Lord has in store for you is going to appreciate you for who you are. Because if a person cannot appreciate you when you're at your worst, that person won't appreciate you when you're at your best. So based on all that, when Ruth and Boaz first met, sure, she could put on makeup, she could freshen herself up, and she truly wasn't coming across as being a seductress. At first she was just working in the field, but basically she just cleaned herself up. Boaz, he had already gotten a favorable impression of her. So it, in a sense, was just looking her best, not coming across as someone who's trying to seduce him. Because if you're a man and you have an interest in a Ruth, if you approach her the wrong way, if you approach her in a carnal way, she's going to shut you down. If you're a woman and you present yourself to a Boaz and you come across in the wrong way, he too will shut you down. If you're a man and you approach a Ruth and you're not a Boaz, as soon as she discovers, she will cut it off. If you are a woman and you present yourself as a Ruth and that Boaz finds out that it is not the truth, he will cut you off. Because one of the things about a Ruth and a Boaz is about having that relationship with the Lord. And if you're the kind of person who's going to come into that person's life and ruin that relationship with the Lord, you're going to suffer. There are many people out there who want a godly man or a godly woman, but they're not godly themselves. And they're going to come and drag that person down with them. And those are individuals who will find that the Lord himself may stand between him or her and that Ruth or Boaz. Now looking at Jezebel. Jezebel was married to King Ahab. Ahab died. Jehu replaced him as king. Let's take a look at Jezebel and how she tried to seduce Jehu. Because this brings up another thing. There's some women out there, and I'll even say women and men, who they're like a Jezebel. They're trying to get in a relationship with a godly man or woman. And they're thinking that godly man or woman is kind of like an Ahab, someone who is evil, someone who they can manipulate. But then they realize, or they'll realize eventually, that that man or woman is more like a Jehu, a warrior for God who does not tolerate Jezebels. And it will not go well for that individual. Now for Jezebel, when she first had an encounter with Jehu, who had just been, or had been recently anointed as king, this will happen. And looking in 2 Kings 9, verses 7, verse 30. And when Jehu was come to Jezreel, Jezebel heard of it, and she painted her face and tied her hair and looked out a window. Jezebel's reputation preceded her also. So she got herself what you call all dolled up to look her best for Jehu. But it doesn't matter how much makeup she speckled on her face on that foundation. She had a filthy foundation. Jezebel was a witch. The entire country knew it. Jehu knew it. Jehu was on a godly assignment. So it didn't matter how she presented herself. Her true colors were shining through. Her reputation preceded her. Character. Character counts. And Jehu entered in at the gate, and she said, Had Zimri peace, who slew his master? And he lifted up his face to the window and said, Who is on my side? Who? And there looked out to him 2 or 3 eunuchs. And he said, Throw her down. So they threw her down, and some of her blood sprinkled on the wall and on the horses, and he rode her underfoot. And when he was come in, he did eat and drink, and said, Go, see now this cursed woman, and bury her, for she is a king's daughter. He called her a cursed woman. A Ruth or a Boaz isn't going to have anything to do with you if you are a Jezebel. Nothing. And they went to bury her, and they found no more of her than the skull and the feet and the palms of her hands. Wow, those horses did a number on her. Wherefore, they came in again and told him, and he said, This is the word of the Lord, which he spake by his servant Elijah the Tishbite, saying, In the portion of Jezreel shall dogs eat the flesh of Jezebel, and the carcass of Jezebel shall be as dung upon the face of a field in the portion of Jezreel, so that they shall not say, This is Jezebel. You may feel sorry for Jezebel. Quite frankly, I don't. And when you go to Revelation 2, you will see where the Lord speaks about Jezebel, about how he gave her chances to repent, and she did not. Jehu wasn't playing. Jehu was not an Ahab. And there are Jezebels out in this world who they've had interactions with Ahabs. They're used to manipulating people. And when someone stands up to them, that's when their true colors shine through. They may come across to being a Ruth, but given time, you will see the Jezebel coming out. And to let you know just how different Ruth and Boaz were, or correction, how different Jezebel and Ruth were. Also, in saying that, Jezebel and Ruth, they both had a past. They were both widows, at least at that point in time. We all have a past. In some cases, especially after repenting, the Lord will wash us clean. Ruth and Boaz, it worked out well for them. They were blessed with a child, Obed, the father of Jesse, the father of David. So some of you, you may be divorced, widowed, and you may not feel like a Ruth. But that is for God to determine. That is for God to determine. And back in those days, they were big in, for example, marrying virgins. Ruth was not a virgin, but she was the woman that the Lord had in store for Boaz. And out of all the women in Israel, the Lord selected a woman from Moab for Boaz. So your Ruth or Boaz may not come in a way that you expect. Okay, turning to 1 Kings 16, we kind of get the backdrop regarding Jezebel. I want to mention who's your daddy. Again, very important. So, and Ahab, the son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord above all that were before him. So Ahab, the son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord above all that were before him. So Ahab was evil. So the Lord had no reason to stand in the way of Ahab marrying Jezebel. But Ahab or Jezebel marrying Boaz, that would have been a different story. That would have been a different story. So if someone comes into your life, if you're a man and if you're a man who's like a Boaz and a Jezebel comes into your life claiming to be your gift from God, reject that person. Reject that person. And if you are a Ruth and someone comes into your life claiming to be your gift from God, but that person is like an Ahab, reject that person. I can't even begin to imagine that the Lord is going to bring someone into your life who is basically pure evil as his gift to you. And it came to pass, as if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, the sons of Nebat, that he took to wife Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Zidonians, and went and served Baal and worshipped him. Also, Ethbaal, it actually means with Baal, with the devil. Jezebel's daddy was the devil, and her biological father was with the devil. Very important for you to know who a person's father is. And he reared up an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he had built in Samaria. And Ahab made a grove, and Ahab did more to provoke the Lord God of Israel to anger than all the kings of Israel that were before him. Also, by the Lord allowing Ahab and Jezebel to get married, that was heaping more judgment on Ahab. So if someone comes into your life, you are a Ruth or a Boaz, but that person is like an Ahab or a Jezebel, reject that individual. Get away from him or her. So we see in both cases, Ruth, she dressed herself up, went to go visit Boaz, and it worked out well for them. In part, because they had a foundation on which to build a relationship. Also, at the center of that was God, and we see it by its fruit. I mentioned about them having a son. They're in the lineage of Christ. Ahab, he married Jezebel. The Lord had no reason to oppose it. In fact, he had reason to facilitate it, because with that, he could issue judgment. Please be careful when it comes to relationships. It's one of the most important decisions you can make. And if you don't include the Lord in it, it can cause serious issues. And the devil knows this, which is why he will do his best to try to send people your way on false pretenses to basically hold you captive. Sometimes they succeed, at least for a while. It is truly not what you look like on the outside, but you should do your best to look your best. But it's not what you look like on the outside. It is going to be something on the inside. When the Lord brought Eve to Adam, she was naked. But Adam recognized the spiritual connection that they had. Bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. He knew there was something inside of her that resonated with what is inside of him. Relationships that are not built on a strong foundation with God at the center of them tend to fail. You can't cover up bad character. And even when you have dirt on your face, like we can assume that Ruth probably did out in the field, when she wasn't looking her best, her character still shined through. Character counts. A physically attractive person can look ugly if he or she has poor character. And a person who's not considered physically attractive may be very beautiful because of his or her character. I'll leave it at that.